From her weathered cabin at the crossroads, Martha Holloway rises before dawn to stir the great iron pot. Steam rises like memories of her Thomas, now 5 years in the cold ground. Travelers smell her hearty stew from miles away, cowboys, drifters, families heading west. Each day she ladles warmth into strangers' bowls, a widow's ritual of remembrance. Deep in Apache territory, where most settlers dare not venture, she serves all who hunger without question. She doesn't see the watchful eyes from the mesa's edge, doesn't know that her simple act of giving has captured the attention of Náshŭ Jew, whose people whisper he can see into a person's soul. What will happen when the powerful Apache, prince, and the humble widow's worlds finally collide? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The chill of pre-dawn crept through the cabin's log walls as Martha stirred from sleep. For a moment, as she always did, she reached across the empty space beside her, fingertips finding only cool sheets where Thomas once lay. 5 years, and still her body remembered. 5 years, and still she woke with that brief hope before reality settled in her chest, heavy as river stones. Outside, a coyote called to its kin. Martha swung her legs over the edge of the bed, feeling every one of her 53 years in the creak of her knees. Buckley, her aging sheepdog, thumped his tail against the floor at the foot of her bed, his muzzle now grayed like her hair. "Another day, old boy," she whispered, reaching for the worn shawl that hung from the bedpost. Thomas had given it to her on their 10th anniversary, woven from wool he traded 3 months' worth of carpentry for. The cabin felt especially empty in these quiet moments. She slipped her feet into leather, moccasins her one concession to the ways of the land they'd settled on. They were more practical than the proper shoes she'd brought from Boston all those years ago. Martha lit a single candle, shielding its fragile flame with a weathered hand as she made her way to the hearth. "Time to wake you up," she murmured to the banked embers. With practiced care, she fed kindling to the glowing coals, blowing gently until flames licked upward. The scent of pine smoke filled the cabin, familiar and comforting. The great iron pot hung from its hook beside the fire, waiting for its daily purpose. Martha reached for the wooden spoon that rested in a place of honor on the mantel. It was the only cooking utensil she'd managed to save when raiders had burned their first homestead. Thomas had carved it himself during their early years together, the handle worn smooth from years of use. "Mother's soup needs a proper spoon," Thomas had told her, demonstrating how to stir in slow, careful circles. "Never rush good soup, Martha mine. The flavors need time to court each other." She smiled at the memory as she filled the pot with water from yesterday's collection. The drought made everything harder, but she'd never missed a day. Not in 5 years. Outside, Buckley barked once his morning greeting to the world. Through the single window, Martha watched the eastern sky lighten from black to deep indigo. She'd timed this ritual precisely. The soup needed 3 full hours of gentle simmering to be ready for the first travelers, who would arrive with the full light of day. Into the pot went the dried beans she'd soaked overnight, followed by the last of winter's preserved vegetables. Martha's fingers worked with a mind of their own, recalling the lessons Thomas had taught her about his mother's recipe. "Secrets in the order," she could hear him saying, his voice still so clear in her memory. "Beans first, to soften proper, then the roots to give it body. Meat if you've got it, and the greens last so they keep their spirit." Today she had meat a rabbit Buckley had somehow managed to catch despite his arthritic hips. It wasn't much, but it would add richness to the broth that would stretch to feed whoever came to her door. Game had grown scarce as the drought tightened its grip on the land, driving animals to follow the receding water sources deeper into the mountain's dot as the pot began to steam. Martha added her carefully guarded spices salt, traded from a Mexican. traveler, dried sage from the hillside, and a pinch of precious pepper she rationed like gold dust. Thomas had taught her that, too. A good soup feeds the body, he'd said, but the right seasoning feeds the soul. Martha stirred with long, meditative strokes, watching the ingredients swirl in the firelight. This daily act was her prayer, her remembrance, her purpose. When Thomas died defending their second homestead from bandits, the grief had nearly taken her, too. For weeks she'd barely eaten, barely moved, until the day a lost child had stumbled upon her cabin, half-starved and separated from a wagon train, feeding. That child had awakened something in Martha. Thomas had always insisted they share their table with any traveler in need. No one should go hungry in sight of your fire, he'd say. In continuing his practice, she'd found a way to keep him alive. The soup began to simmer as first light breached. The horizon. Martha added a handful of precious barley, watching the grains disappear beneath the surface. Outside, the crossroads that had once been merely a fork in a little-used trail had, over time, become a recognized waypoint. Partly because of the natural spring nearby, though it flowed weaker each season, but mostly, she knew, because word had spread about the widow who always had a pot of soup ready. She lifted her gaze to the eastern window, where the mountains cut a jagged line against the lightening sky. Somewhere beyond those peaks lay Apache lands. Martha knew the risk of living alone so close to their territory, but in 5 years she'd never had trouble with the tribe. Sometimes she wondered if Thomas's spirit somehow protected her, though her practical New England upbringing made her dismiss such fanciful thoughts. Buckley nudged her hand with his nose, reminding her it was time for his morning meal. She scratched behind his ears, grateful for his loyal company in this solitary life. "We've got visitors coming soon, old friend," she told him, ladling a small portion of broth into his bowl. "Let's make them welcome." She didn't know, couldn't know that today's visitors would change everything. By mid-morning, the first travelers appeared on the dusty trail leading to Martha's cabin. She recognized the McClellan family's wagon and made the journey to Fort Bridger for supplies every month. Their route deliberately planned to coincide with what the youngest McClellan child called Soup Day. "Morning, Mrs. Holloway," Samuel McClellan called as he drew the wagon to a halt. His wife Sarah nodded respectfully, already gathering their 3 children and the chipped bowls they'd brought along, specifically for this purpose. "The soup smells like heaven itself," Sarah said, approaching the hearth where Martha had moved. The iron pot outdoors to serve visitors more easily. "Just Thomas's recipe," Martha replied, the familiar modest response coming automatically. "Not much meat today, I'm afraid." "More than we've seen in a week," Samuel said quietly, so the children wouldn't hear. He accepted his bowl with a nod that conveyed both gratitude and concern. Game scarce everywhere. Droughts driving everything north or deeper into the mountains. Martha ladled generous portions for the children first, as was her custom. "Any news from the fort? Troops being sent south. Indian troubles, they say." Samuel's voice dropped further. "Not Apache Comanche, but folks are nervous all the same." Martha merely nodded. Talk of Indian troubles always made her uncomfortable. In 5 years at the crossroads, she'd glimpsed Apache riders in the distance occasionally, but they'd never approached nor troubled her. She sometimes wondered if they avoided her out of respect for her solitude, or perhaps because the crossroads themselves held some significance to them. As the McClellan family ate, Martha retrieved the leather-bound journal from inside the cabin, her guest book, begun 3 years earlier when a schoolteacher passing through had suggested it. "For posterity," the young woman had said. "Someone should record what you're doing here." Sarah McClellan wiped her hands carefully before taking the quill Martha offered. She wrote in a neat schoolteacher's hand, "June 18th, 1851. The soup sustains U.S. on our journey, as does Mrs. Holloway's kindness. May God continue to bless this hearth." By noon, the crossroads hosted a gathering of travelers that had come to feel like a temporary community. 3 cowboys driving cattle north to Wyoming Territory, a Mormon family heading to Salt Lake, and a weathered old trapper whom Martha knew only as Ellis, who appeared like clockwork at the changing of seasons. The unspoken rules of Martha's hospitality had evolved naturally over time. Everyone received a full bowl, regardless of their appearance or circumstances. Those who could left something in trade. The cowboys had brought coffee beans. The Mormon family offered fresh-baked bread, and Ellis always brought pelts that Martha could use for winter bedding. Those who had nothing to trade often helped. With chores chopping wood, mending fence posts, or fetching water from the spring drought, no weapons were drawn near the fire. Arguments were left at the crossroads, and everyone, without exception, signed the guest book. "Heard tell of your soup 200 miles south," one of the younger cowboys said, accepting a second helping. Man in Taos said, "When you reach the widow's crossroads, you'll eat like a king." Martha smiled slightly at the exaggeration. "Hardly a king's meal." "Better," the cowboy insisted. "Kings don't taste love in their food." The Mormon father, a solemn man named Brother Joseph, nodded in agreement. "The Lord's hand guides your ladle, Mrs. Holloway. Many would have abandoned this place after losing a husband." Martha's smile faded slightly. This place was Thomas's dream. He saw the crossroads and said someday it would connect people from all directions. She looked out at the gathering. "I suppose, in a way, it has." As afternoon shadows lengthened, a new group appeared on the Eastern Trail. Mexican traders with heavily laden mules, bringing goods from Santa Fe. Their leader, Miguel, had passed through enough times to greet Martha by name. "Señora Holloway," he called, removing his hat. "We bring news and salt." News was as valuable as salt in these parts. The traders spoke of political tensions brewing between the territories, rumors of gold in California bringing swarms of desperate men west, and whispers of unrest among various tribes as white settlers pushed further into their hunting grounds. Martha listened while serving, absorbing the complex tapestry of events that shaped the world beyond her crossroads. Through these visitors, she remained connected to a changing nation that she otherwise might never witness. As the Mexican traders prepared to continue their journey, Miguel approached Martha privately. "There is something else, Señora," he said, his voice low. "Apache riders watch the trails more closely these days. They observe who travels where." He hesitated. "And they ask questions about you." Martha's hand stilled on the ladle. "About me?" Miguel nodded. "Nothing threatening. They seem curious. They know of the soup woman, as they call you. They say you feed their people too, when they come dressed as travelers." Martha considered this. Had Apache tribespeople been among her visitors? She made no distinctions, asked no questions about origins. Anyone hungry was welcome. "Their prince, Náshŭ, is said to be interested in your story," Miguel continued. "It is unusual, you understand, for a lone white woman to live unmolested so close to their hunting grounds." Before Martha could respond, Ellis the trapper approached, his keen eyes fixed on the eastern ridge. "Got company," he said quietly, nodding toward a distant dust cloud. "Soldiers, by the look of it, coming fast." Martha returned to her pot, adding, "Water to stretch what remained." Whatever the coming hours might bring, she would do what she had always done, offer what comfort she could, one bowl at a time. From his position on the mesa overlooking the crossroads, Náshŭ watched the white woman through narrowed eyes. The eagle feather talisman at his throat, symbol of his status as son of the chief, and his connection to the spirit world, fluttered in the hot, dry breeze. 3 warriors crouched beside him, silent and patient as the rocks themselves. "The soup woman," he said softly in his native tongue. "She has been here for 5 winters, too close to our hunting grounds, said Kitson, the eldest of his companions. The white soldiers follow where their women settle. Náshŭ made no reply. At 32 winters, he had seen enough of both white settlers and soldiers to understand their patterns. Yet this woman defied those patterns. Alone, seemingly unafraid, she had carved out a place at the crossroads, and somehow survived when others would have perished or fled. What puzzled him most was how the elders had allowed it. His father, Chief Dying, normally insisted on driving away any settler who ventured this close to their sacred springs. Yet when the council had discussed the widow at the crossroads, his father had been strangely contemplative. "She harms nothing," the old chief had said. "She feeds the hungry without question, even our own people when they travel in disguise." This last revelation had startled Náshŭ. "Our people eat at her fire?" "Some of our young men curious about white ways have tested her hospitality," Dine admitted. "They report she shows no fear, asks no questions, demands no payment. She serves all alike." It was this claim that Náshŭ had come to verify himself. His name, "He Who Sees the Generous," had been given to him as a child when he demonstrated an uncanny ability to discern true generosity from false kindness. His people believed it was a gift from the spirits, this capacity to see into a person's heart and judge their intentions. Now, watching the white woman serve soup to the gathered travelers, he studied every movement, every gesture, the way she served children first, how she listened attentively to each visitor, the absence of fear in her bearing. All these things he noted. The soldiers arriving at her cabin gave him pause. He tensed as they dismounted, 7 blue-coated, men with rifles and hard eyes. Yet the woman showed no alarm, greeting them as she had the others. "The usual hospitality, Mrs. Holloway?" the lead soldier asked, his tone familiar. "You know there's always enough, Captain Fletcher," she replied, though Náshŭ noted the slight stiffening of her shoulders. The Apache prince leaned forward slightly, focusing his gift on the interaction below. The soldier Fletcher treated the woman with a deference that seemed born more of superstition than respect, as if she were some kind of witch or spirit to be appeased rather than a simple widow. Interesting. "Any trouble from the locals?" Fletcher asked, his eyes scanning the ridgelines. Náshŭ and his warriors remained perfectly still, invisible against the rocks in a way the white men never seemed to master. "No trouble at all, the woman misses," Holloway answered firmly, "as I've told you each time you ask." Fletcher nodded, though his expression suggested disbelief. "You'd be safer at the fort, Mom. Times are changing. The savages are getting restless with all the traffic through their lands." Náshŭ felt Kitson tense beside him at the word savages, but a quick hand signal kept his warrior calm. Below, the woman's response caught his attention. "I've had no quarrel with the Apache," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. "They have their ways, we have ours. There's room enough if we're respectful." Fletcher snorted. "Respectful? They're animals, ma'am." Something changed in the woman's demeanor, then a straightening of her spine, a coolness entering her voice. "Not in my experience, Captain. And I'd thank you not to speak so at my fire." Náshŭ felt a spark of surprise. The woman was defending his people? To a soldier who could presumably offer her protection. Most puzzling. "Your fire, your rules," Fletcher conceded, though his tone had hardened. "Just know the army won't always be passing through when you need us." "I've managed 5 years without needing rescue," she replied evenly. The conversation shifted to other matters, news of fort expansions, new settlements being established further west, rumors of gold. Náshŭ listened carefully, gathering intelligence that would be valuable to his father Dot as the afternoon waned. The soldiers departed, followed soon after by the other travelers. The woman Martha, he had heard others call her, was left alone with her dog as the shadows lengthened across the dusty crossroads. Náshŭ watched as she carefully banked her cooking fire, washed her great pot with precious water, and carried the remaining soup inside her cabin. There was a dignity to her movements, an economy born of long practice and solitude. "What do you see in her heart?" Kitson asked quietly. Náshŭ considered the question carefully. His gift had shown him much, but also left him with questions. There was grief in the woman, deep and abiding, yet it had not twisted into bitterness as he had seen in so many whites who had suffered loss at the frontier's edge. Instead, her sorrow seemed to have opened her rather than closed her. "I see ... he began, then paused, searching for the right words. "I see a woman who has made peace with the land and with solitude. I see generosity that comes from understanding hunger, not from seeking praise. Is she a threat to our people?" Kitson pressed. Náshŭ touched the eagle feather at his throat, feeling its energy pulse against his skin. "No," he said finally, "but she may be something more interesting. She may be an ally if the drought continues to worsen." He rose fluidly to his feet, signaling the end of their observation. "I will return tonight," he decided, "alone." Kitson's eyebrows rose in surprise. "To speak with her?" "No," Náshŭ replied. "To taste her soup myself. Only then will I know the truth of her heart." Martha woke to Buckley's worried whine. The first light of dawn revealed what the dog had already sensed. The water barrel outside the cabin stood empty, its wooden sides dry and contracted in the heat. She ran a hand over her face, pushing aside the weariness that seemed to settle deeper in her bones each morning. "I know, old friend," she murmured, patting the sheepdog's head. Spring's running low. For 3 weeks now, the drought had tightened its grip on the land. What had begun as an unusually dry spring had transformed into a punishing summer. The small spring that had faithfully provided water for her cabin and countless travelers had dwindled to a mere trickle, forcing Martha to ration every precious drop. She dressed quickly and gathered her water buckets. The great iron pot would need filling if she was to maintain her daily ritual. Some days she wondered if the effort was worth the struggle, but then she would remember Thomas's voice. "The day you stop serving others is the day you truly die, Martha mine." The path to the spring wound through scrubby junipers, their normally blue-green foliage now dusty and gray in the drought. Martha noticed animal tracks everywhere, deer, coyote, even what looked like mountain lion prints, all converging on the spring. The wild creatures were desperate too. When she reached the spring, her heart sank. What yesterday had been a small pool was now just damp earth with the barest trickle of moisture seeping from the rocks. She would have to dig. Setting down her buckets, Martha used a small shovel. She'd taken to carrying for this very purpose, and began carefully excavating the center of the seep. Slowly, painfully, a small puddle formed in the depression she'd created. Martha waited patiently, allowing the water to gather before carefully filling her first bucket, taking care not to stir up the silt. The process took nearly an hour, and even then, she had less than half the water she normally collected. Half. To make do, she told herself, carrying the precious liquid back to her cabin. It would be enough for the soup, barely, but little remained for other needs. Her own thirst would have to wait. As she stoked the morning fire, Martha glanced at the empty water barrel that stood by her door, a stark reminder of the worsening conditions. The barrel had been full to the brim just 3 weeks ago, a comfortable buffer against hard times. Now it stood as dry as the creek beds throughout the region. The drought had changed the patterns of the crossroads, too. Fewer travelers passed through now, with many choosing routes closer to reliable rivers, despite the greater distances. Those who did arrive came with their own thirst, their own empty canteens and water barrels. Just yesterday, Martha had watched a family of settlers turn away when they learned she could barely spare drinking water. much less enough for their oxen. The father's eyes had held a mix of desperation and resignation that haunted her still. More would come today, hoping for both soup and water, and she would have to disappoint them. "We'll manage," she told Buckley, who watched her with worried eyes as she carefully measured water into the iron pot. "We always do." But even as she spoke the words, Martha felt their hollowness. Thomas had taught her to read the signs of the land, and everything she saw spoke of a drought unlike any in living memory. The old-timers who passed through trappers, who had roamed these territories for decades, all said the same thing. They had never seen it this bad. She added the last of her dried beans to the pot, stretching them with extra barley to make the soup go further. The vegetables from her small garden were stunted and few, but she added them anyway, along with the precious herbs she'd been saving. No meat today. Buckley was too old to hunt successfully in this heat, and game had grown scarce besides Dot. As the soup began to simmer, Martha stepped outside to survey the crossroads. The usual dust hung in the air, but something about the quality of light seemed different today, a strange amber hue that made the distant mountains appear closer than they were. Weather coming, perhaps, though she'd seen no promising clouds. In weeks, a movement on the eastern ridge caught her eye, a lone rider silhouetted against the morning sky. Apache, by the look of him, though at this distance she couldn't be certain. Whoever it was made no move to approach, simply watching. Martha raised her hand in acknowledgement, neither inviting nor warding off. After a moment, the figure returned. The gesture then disappeared over the ridge. Martha wasn't sure why, but the brief exchange left her with an odd sense of comfort. Perhaps it was simply knowing she wasn't entirely alone in this struggling land. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. The cabin, usually a refuge, now held the warmth like an oven. Martha moved her chair to the small patch of shade beside the door, bringing her mending basket and Buckley's water bowl. The old dog panted heavily despite the shade, his tongue lolling. "Just a sip," she said, pouring a small measure of water for him. "We need to save the rest." The dog lapped gratefully, then settled at her feet with a deep sigh. Martha's fingers worked automatically at mending a torn shirt sleeve as her eyes scanned the horizon. No travelers yet today. Perhaps none would. Come. The thought brought a pang of loneliness she hadn't expected. The daily visitors, with their stories and news, had become her connection to the wider world. Without them, the isolation of her position pressed in more heavily. A hot wind picked up, swirling dust around the crossroads. Martha squinted against it, then froze as she spotted something unexpected tumbling toward her cabin, a tumbleweed, nearly as tall as she was, bouncing and rolling on the gusting wind. Behind it came another, and another. Soon a small army of the skeletal plants surrounded her cabin, piling against the walls like bony sentinels. "Never a good sign," she murmured, remembering Thomas's words about tumbleweeds. They only proliferated. In the worst droughts, when other plants had given up their hold on the soil. As the afternoon wore on, the oppressive heat began to affect even the soup, evaporating more quickly than usual. Martha covered the pot with a damp cloth, trying to preserve both the moisture and the flavor. If travelers did come, they would need the nourishment more than ever. Night fell across the crossroads like a blanket of blue velvet, stars emerging with exceptional clarity in the dry air. Martha had served only 3 travelers that day, a pair of gaunt prospectors, heading east after abandoning their California dreams, and a Mexican trader who'd lost 2 mules to the drought. She had shared what little soup she could spare, carefully, preserving a single bowl for her own supper. Now, with Buckley snoring softly by the hearth, she sat in Thomas's old chair beside the open cabin door, savoring the slight coolness that night had brought. In her hands she rolled a small, smooth stone, a moonstone Thomas had found during their first year at the crossroads. "It glows under moonlight," he told her, to remind us there's magic even in dark times. The stone did seem to capture the moonlight, gleaming with an inner luminescence that comforted her. She'd taken to carrying it in her pocket during these difficult days, a talisman against despair. A coyote called in the distance, its lonely howl echoing across the empty landscape. Martha stiffened slightly when Buckley's ears pricked up, though. The old dog didn't rise, his eyes fixed on something beyond the edge of moonlight surrounding the cabin. "Someone there?" Martha called softly, peering into the darkness. She felt no fear required energy she couldn't spare, but caution had kept her alive these 5 years. No answer came, but she sensed a presence, not threatening, but watchful. She'd lived in this wild country long enough to develop instincts about such things. "If you're hungry, there's soup," she said to the darkness. "Not much, but it's warm." Still silence. Martha nodded to herself and rose stiffly. From the cooling pot on the hearth, she ladled the last of the day's soup into a wooden bowl. Steam rose in the cool night air as she carried it outside and placed it on the stump that served as her outdoor table. "I'll leave it here," she said, addressing the shadows. "No need to show yourself if you don't wish to." She turned and went back inside, leaving the cabin door partially open, an act that would have seemed madness to most settlers in Apache territory, but one that felt right to Martha. She resumed her seat, picked up her mending, and began to sew by the light of a single candle, deliberately focusing on her work rather than watching the bowl outside dot in the shadows beyond the cabins. Light Náshŭ watched the white woman with careful eyes. He had approached silently, as was his way, intending only to observe her evening rituals for signs of her true nature. Many whites presented one face to travelers by day and revealed their true selves in private. The woman Martha had surprised him by sensing his presence. More surprising still was her calm offer of food rather than fear or hostility. Now the bowl sat steaming in the moonlight, an offering made without demands. Náshŭ touched the moonstone he carried in his medicine pouch, a sacred object passed down through generations of his family's shamans. The stone was said to enhance his gift of seeing truth, especially under the light of the full moon. Tonight would be a good test of both the stone's power and the woman's heart. He moved forward silently, staying beyond the circle of candlelight from the cabin. The old dog inside lifted his head, but made no sound, merely watching with rheumy eyes as Náshŭ approached the bowl. The scent reached him first simple, yet somehow complex, carrying hints of herbs he recognized from the mountains, beans and grains. No meat today, he noticed. The drought affected everyone equally. Lifting the bowl, he studied its contents in the moonlight before taking a careful sip. The flavor surprised him richer than he'd expected, with a depth that spoke of slow cooking and careful attention. Despite the simple ingredients, there was a quality to it that reminded him of the ceremonial foods prepared for tribal celebrations. As he drank, Náshŭ allowed his gift to open fully, seeking the intention behind this food. His people believed that cookery carried the spirit of its maker, that one could taste generosity or bitterness, love or resentment in every bite. What flowed into him with the warm broth was unexpected. Sorrow, yes, deep and abiding, but not the angry grief that poisoned so many. This was a sorrow transformed, channeled into care for others. He tasted loneliness, but also purpose, determination, and a strange kind of peace. Most surprising of all, he tasted respect for the ingredients themselves, for the land that provided them, for whoever would receive this nourishment. There was nothing careless in this food, nothing wasteful or contemptuous. Náshŭ finished the bowl, considering what he had learned. This woman's generosity was genuine, her spirit clear as the spring waters before the drought came. She was, as she appeared, to be a rarity among the white settlers he had encountered. From inside the cabin, Martha's voice came softly. "There's water in the dipper if you're thirsty." Not much to spare these days, but enough for a drink. Náshŭ hesitated, then spoke for the first time, keeping to the shadows. The soup speaks well of your heart, widow woman. A pause from inside. And, thank you. It was my husband's recipe. Your husband had wisdom in his hands. That he did. Her voice carried no fear, only a gentle curiosity. Will you come again tomorrow? Náshŭ considered the question. Perhaps. The drought grows worse. Many journeys must be reconsidered. Yes, she agreed simply. The spring barely flows now. You should leave this place, he advised, surprising himself with his concern. The water will not return soon. Martha's silhouette appeared in the doorway, though she made no move to look directly at him, respecting his desire for anonymity. This is my home, she said quietly, my husband's dream. I'll not abandon it while I can still tend the fire. Náshŭ nodded in the darkness, understanding stubborn loyalty to one's place. Then I will pray to the rain spirits for you, soup woman. And I'll pray to my God for you, stranger, she replied. Though I suspect we're talking to the same power, just in different languages. The observation startled him with its perception. This woman understood more than most of her kind. Náshŭ placed the empty bowl back on the stump and withdrew into the night, his mind filled with new questions about the widow at the crossroads. The next day brought no travelers to the crossroads. By noon, with the sun beating down mercilessly, Martha knew none would come. The drought had finally severed the tenuous threads of the trail network, forcing even the most determined wayfarers to seek routes near more reliable water sources. With no soup to prepare, Martha found herself at loose ends, a rare occurrence in her carefully structured life. She sat in the cabin's relative coolness, Buckley panting at her feet, and pulled Thomas's journal from the cedar chest where she kept her most precious possessions. The leather binding was worn smooth from handling, the pages yellowed at the edges. Thomas had been more educated than most frontier men, a carpenter by trade, who had learned his letters properly and maintained the habit of writing daily observations. Martha ran her fingers over his firm, careful script, feeling closer to him, as she always did when reading his words. June 18th, 1846, she read aloud to Buckley. Reached the crossroads today after 3 weeks of hard travel from Fort Laramie. Martha bears up well despite the difficulties. Found a good spring not 50 yards from where the trails meet, with cottonwoods offering shade. This could be the place we've sought. Martha smiled faintly at the memory. Thomas had been searching for the right spot to establish a way station for travelers, not a proper town, which neither of them wanted, but a place of respite on the difficult journey. West. He'd recognized the strategic value of the crossroads immediately. She turned pages, skimming entries that detailed the building of their first cabin, Thomas's plans for expansion, the garden they'd planted. Then she paused at an entry from there. First winter. December 3rd, 1846. 3 strangers arrived today, half frozen and starving. Their wagon train took a wrong turn before the first snows and became separated. These 3 set out to find help but lost their way. Martha made soup from our precious stores without hesitation. When I questioned whether we could spare so much, she reminded me that my own mother had taken in strangers during the hard winter of 21, and that such generosity had saved my family. No one should go hungry in sight of your fire, my mother always said. Martha has taken this to heart more thoroughly than I. Martha closed her eyes, remembering. That first winter had indeed been difficult, their supplies barely sufficient for themselves. Yet something had compelled her to share what they had. Perhaps it had been Thomas's stories of his childhood, how his widowed mother had maintained an open door despite their poverty. Teresa. Holloway had been renowned in their small Massachusetts town for her generosity. Though she had little, she shared freely soup in winter, garden vegetables in summer, preserves in fall. The Lord provides, she would say. Our task is to pass it on. Thomas had carried his mother's philosophy west, along with her soup recipes. Martha, raised in a more cautious household, had initially found his open-handedness alarming. We'll be taken advantage of, she'd warned early in their marriage. Perhaps, Thomas had replied with his gentle smile, but I'd rather be known as the fool who gave too much than the miser who gave too little. Martha turned to entries from their second year, after raiders had burned their first cabin while they were away trading at the fort. They'd lost nearly everything: their stores, their tools, their carefully tended garden. April 10th, 1847. Beginning again. The raiders took much, but they cannot take our determination. Martha wanted to return east, but I convinced her to try once more. The crossroads calls to me still. I believe we are meant to create something here that will outlast us both. She ran her finger over that last line, feeling the indentation of his pen in the paper. Thomas had been right, though not in the way either of them had imagined. The way station he'd envisioned had never fully materialized. Instead, Martha's soup kettle had become the crossroads' true landmark. Near the journal's end, she found the entry Thomas had written the day before he died. September 2nd, 1849. Rumors of raiders in the area again. I've sent Martha to the fort, with our trading goods, while I remain to protect the cabin. Perhaps it's foolish pride to stand against such odds, but a man must defend what he's built. I've hidden this journal where Martha will find it if the worst happens. My dearest wife, if you are reading this, know that every moment with you has been a blessing beyond measure. Should I fall, do not let grief consume you. Live, Martha, continue the work we began. Feed the hungry, shelter the traveler. In this work, you will find me still beside you. The next day, Martha had returned to find Thomas dead on their threshold, his rifle empty beside him. He'd managed to drive off the raiders, but not before taking a bullet himself. She'd buried him on the hill, overlooking the crossroads, marking his grave with a wooden cross and the simple epitaph, Thomas Holloway, he fed the hungry. For weeks afterward, Martha had moved through her days like a ghost, barely eating, barely sleeping. Then came the lost child, awakened her purpose once more. Since that day, she had kept her promise to Thomas, feeding whoever came to her door, offering what comfort she could in this harsh land. She closed the journal and returned it carefully to the cedar chest. Thomas's voice seemed to echo in the quiet cabin. No one should go hungry inside of your fire. I'm trying, Thomas, she whispered, even with the spring running dry. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters with hot, dusty fingers. Martha looked through the window at the empty crossroads, wondering if her unseen visitor from the night before would return, and what tomorrow might bring to her dwindling world. The Apache camp lay nestled in a protected valley 3 miles east of the crossroads. Unlike the temporary encampments of their more nomadic days, this settlement had developed semi-permanent structures over the past decade as the tribe adapted to changing circumstances. Still, they maintained the ability to move quickly if needed, a necessity in these uncertain times. In the center of the camp, elders gathered around a small fire despite the day's heat. Before them sat the sacred water vessel, an ancient clay container passed down through generations, its surface decorated with symbols of clouds, lightning, and flowing streams. The vessel was nearly empty, containing only a few precious drops collected from the last rainfall almost 2 months ago. Náshŭ approached the circle and took his place beside his father, chief dying. The old man's face was deeply lined, his eyes clouded with cataracts, but still alert, watching his son with practiced assessment. You visited the soup woman, he stated rather than asked. Little escaped the chief's notice, despite his failing eyesight. I did, Náshŭ confirmed. I tasted her food. The elders waited expectantly. Náshŭ's gift of discernment was respected throughout the tribe, his judgments of character rarely questioned. "Her heart is clear," he said finally. "Her generosity is not a mask for fear or a ploy to gain favor. She gives because it is her nature to give, as water flows downhill." Several of the elders nodded, unsurprised. Others looked skeptical. "Even a rattlesnake may seem harmless until it strikes," said Taza, the eldest shaman. "The white people have betrayed truces before." "She is not a treaty maker or a soldier," Náshŭ replied. "She is one woman who honors her dead husband by feeding the hungry." "And yet," Chief Dine said softly, "she represents the first trickle of what may become a flood. Where one settler remains, others follow. Where cabins rise, forts are built." Náshŭ could not argue with this wisdom. He had seen the pattern repeated throughout his lifetime, the slow encroachment of white civilization, one homestead at a time. "The drought affects her as it does us," he said instead. "Her spring nearly fails. Soon she may be forced to leave." "Or seek deeper water on our lands," Taza countered. The discussion might have continued, but a young warrior approached the circle, his expression grave. "The scouts report the western spring has stopped flowing entirely," he announced. "The pool at Whitestone is now mud." A murmur of concern passed through the elders. Whitestone Spring had been reliable even in previous dry years. Its failure was an ominous sign. Chief Dine raised his hand for silence. "A time has come for the water ceremony," he declared. "Too long have we waited, hoping the rains would return naturally." Náshŭ felt a tightening in his chest. The water ceremony was not undertaken lightly. It required sacrifice from all participants and carried great spiritual significance. That his father called for it now revealed the depth of his concern. Preparations began immediately. Women brought forward sacred cornmeal and pine pollen. Men gathered cedar and sage for smudging. Children collected what few wildflowers could still be found to decorate the ceremonial grounds. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Náshŭ retreated to his lodge to prepare himself. He purified his body with sage, smoke, painted his face with symbols of clouds and rain, and dressed in ceremonial buckskins decorated with turquoise beads representing water droplets. When he emerged, the entire tribe had assembled in the ceremonial circle. At its center sat the sacred water vessel, now placed upon a bed of crushed turquoise and white shell symbols of water and purity. Chief Dine nodded to his son. Though the old man would normally lead such an important ceremony, his voice had weakened with age. It fell to Náshŭ, as his heir and a gifted singer, to call to the rain spirits. Náshŭ stepped into the circle, feeling the weight of his people's hopes upon his shoulders. He raised his arms to the cloudless sky and began the first song, his deep voice carrying across the hushed assembly. From the east, black clouds come. From the south, blue clouds come. From the west, yellow clouds come. From the north, white clouds come. From above, rain clouds come. From below, corn plants emerge. Lightning flashes, thunder sounds. Rain falls, corn grows. It is finished in beauty. The tribe joined in the chorus, their voices blending in ancient harmony. 4 times they sang the song, turning to each direction. Then began the dance, slow, deliberate steps that mimicked the falling of rain, the growth of plants, the flowing of streams. As darkness fell, torches were lit around the circle. The dancing continued under the stars, each tribal member approaching the sacred water vessel to offer a prayer. Children prayed for streams to play in once more. Women prayed for water to tend their corn and beans. Men prayed for the return of game animals that had migrated away with the drought. Náshŭ danced until his legs ached and his voice grew hoarse, pouring his spirit into the ceremony. Yet as the night deepened, a strange thought kept returning. To him, the image of Martha Holloway at her crossroads, ladling soup from her dwindling stores. Her prayers and theirs seemed suddenly inexplicably connected. When it came his turn to approach the sacred vessel, he knelt and whispered his prayer. Bring rain not just to our lands, but to all who hunger and thirst, even to the soup woman, who shares your gift of nourishment. As he rose, his father caught his eye with a knowing look. The old chief had missed nothing of his son's recent preoccupation. The white woman occupies your thoughts, Ayn said later, as the ceremony began, to wind down near midnight. Her situation mirrors our own. Náshŭ replied carefully. The chief was silent for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable in the firelight. Finally, he said, there is wisdom sometimes in unexpected places. Our ancestors survived by adapting when necessary. What are you suggesting, Father? Only that water is sacred to all people. Perhaps there are ways of seeking rain that we have not yet tried. The old man's clouded eyes seemed to see far beyond the present moment. Tomorrow, observe their ways more closely. Sometimes the spirits speak through unusual messengers. Náshŭ nodded slowly, sensing permission being granted for what he had already determined to do, return to the crossroads. And perhaps this time, step into the light. Dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of amber and gold as Martha emerged from her cabin, worn bucket in hand. Another day of coaxing water from the failing spring lay ahead. She paused on her threshold, momentarily struck by the beauty of sunrise against the mesa nature's persistence in creating beauty. Even amidst drought, the figure standing at the edge of her clearing was so still that she nearly missed him. When her eyes finally registered his presence, she felt neither surprise nor fear, only a quiet certainty that this moment had been approaching for days. He was tall for an Apache, his lean frame wrapped in buckskins adorned with subtle beadwork that caught the early light. An eagle feather hung from a leather cord at his throat. His face bore ceremonial paint-white streaks, like rain across his cheeks. Though much of it had been worn away during the night's ceremony, Martha set her bucket down slowly. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady. "I wondered if you'd come." Back, Náshŭ took 3 measured steps forward, stopping at a respectful distance. "I am Náshŭ," he said in careful English. "My people call me he who sees the generous." "Martha Holloway," she replied with a slight nod. "My husband called me Martha mine, but most folks just say Widow Holloway these days." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "The travelers call you Soup Woman. Do they now?" She found herself returning the smile. "I suppose there are worse things to be called." Buckley appeared in the doorway behind her, hackles raised slightly. At the stranger's presence, the old dog gave a low warning growl. "Hush, Buckley," Martha scolded gently. "If he meant harm, he'd have done it while we slept." Náshŭ studied the dog with interest. "He has been a good protector for many seasons." "That he has," Martha agreed. "Though he's more bark than bite these days, like me." She gestured toward the rough-hewn bench beside her door. "Would you care to sit? I've little water for coffee, but there's some left from yesterday." "You offer hospitality even when you have little," Náshŭ observed, making no move. Toward the bench. "Why?" Martha considered the question seriously. "My husband believed in feeding anyone who came to our fire. I continue his practice, even knowing I watched your cabin for many days." "Especially then," she said with unexpected firmness. "Watching before approaching shows wisdom, not threat." "You wanted to know if I was truly as I seemed." Náshŭ's eyes narrowed slightly. "You knew I was observing?" "Not you specifically," Martha said, "but I've felt eyes from the ridge for some time. I've lived here 5 years without trouble from your people. I figured there was a reason for that." He nodded slowly, reassessing her perceptiveness. "Our scouts reported a woman who fed everyone equally Mexican, white, sometimes even disguised Apache. My father was curious. Your father, Chief Dine? He touched the eagle feather at his throat. I am his son. Martha absorbed this information, without visible reaction. Then I am honored by your visit. Is your father concerned about my presence here? Some elders are, Náshŭ admitted. One settler becomes many. Many settlers become soldiers. I understand their concern, Martha said, but I've no interest in bringing others. This place was my husband's dream, not mine. I stay for him, not to claim territory. A brief silence fell between them, surprisingly comfortable. The sun climbed higher, promising another scorching day. I must fetch water before the heat builds, Martha said finally. The spring barely flows now, but we need something for the day. The drought affects all equally, Náshŭ said. Last night, our people performed the water ceremony to call the rains. Martha's expression brightened with interest. We had prayer circles for rain at the fort settlement last month. Different words, same hope, I expect. Perhaps. Náshŭ hesitated, then made a decision. I will help you carry water. Before she could protest, he picked up her bucket and gestured for her to lead the way. Martha blinked in surprise, then nodded and started down the path to the spring. They walked in silence, Martha setting a pace that accommodated her stiff joints. At the spring now, just a muddy depression where water seeped slowly from the rocks. Náshŭ observed her careful digging technique without comment. We dig deeper each day, she explained, working the earth with her small shovel. Soon, there'll be nothing left to reach. Your people do not understand the water spirits, Náshŭ said, kneeling beside her. They take without asking, drain without replenishing. Martha paused in her digging. Some do, yes. My Thomas wasn't like that. He planted trees near the spring, said we should give back to the land that sustained us. Náshŭ's expression softened slightly. He had Apache wisdom for a white man. A small pool of water had formed in the hole Martha had dug. They waited in patient silence as it gradually filled, neither feeling the need to fill the quiet with words. When Martha finally began to carefully fill her bucket, she asked, Will you have soup with me today? In the light, not the shadows? Náshŭ considered her invitation. Sharing food openly with a white settler and worthy was a significant step. Yet something about this woman's quiet dignity called for honesty rather than caution. Yes, he decided. I will eat at your fire. Martha nodded, satisfied. As they rose to return to the cabin, she removed her shawl, Thomas's gift, and surprised Náshŭ by draping it around his shoulders against the morning chill. The nights are cool still, even with the drought, she said simply. Náshŭ touched the warm wool, feeling the weight of her trust in the gesture. Among his people, the giving of clothing held significance, an extension of protection, an offering of kinship. Thomas's shawl, he said, recognizing it from his observations. Yes, Martha confirmed, her eyes meeting his directly for the first time. He would approve of it warming a guest. The simple statement seemed to settle something between them. They returned to the cabin as the sun cleared the eastern ridge. An Apache prince and a settler widow walking side by side, united by drought, and the ancient human practice of sharing what little one had with a stranger. Over the next 2 weeks, a careful rhythm developed. Náshŭ would appear at the crossroads shortly after dawn, sometimes bringing small game, a rabbit or quail, that he had managed to catch despite the drought's effect on wildlife. Martha would incorporate his contributions into the day's soup, stretching the precious meat with her dwindling stores of beans and grain. On the 3rd day of their acquaintance, he arrived carrying a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. Unwrapped, it revealed a set of beautifully crafted clay bowls, their surfaces decorated with geometric patterns in earth-toned pigments. For your soup, he explained, setting them carefully on her rough-hewn table. "Made by my sister's hands?" Martha ran her fingers over the smooth clay, admiring the craftsmanship. "They're beautiful," she said softly. "Far too fine for my simple meals. Beauty honors the food and the one who prepares it," Náshŭ replied. "My people believe the vessel shapes the experience of what it contains." Martha nodded slowly, understanding. She had noticed how he approached her soup ritual with reverence, treating the simple meal as something sacred. In his hands, even her wooden spoon became an instrument of ceremony rather than mere utility. They fell into conversation about food and its preparation. Martha described Thomas's mother's techniques for soup making, the careful layering of ingredients, the importance of patience. Náshŭ spoke of Apache cooking traditions, the slow roasting of agave hearts, the grinding of mesquite beans into flour, the preparation of jerky that could sustain a warrior for days. "Your soup," he told her one morning as they worked, side by side, "reminds me of our clan's ceremonial stew. Not in flavor, but in purpose. Food that connects people to each other and to those who came before." Martha found herself sharing more of Thomas with this quiet Apache prince than she had with anyone since his death. Náshŭ proved an attentive listener, asking thoughtful questions about the man whose legacy she carried. In turn, he taught her about plants she had overlooked, desert herbs that could enhance flavor or provide medicine, roots that stored water even in drought, cactus flesh that could be added to soup when little else was available. "This one," he said, showing her a small, unassuming plant with tiny leaves, "we call grandmother's blessing. It grows only in the harshest conditions, yet it sweetens any dish and soothes stomach ailments." Martha learned to identify it by sight and smell, adding it sparingly to her pot as he instructed. The resulting soup had a subtle, complex flavor that reminded her of honey and sage. Though few travelers ventured to the crossroads now, those who did arrive found an unexpected sight: a tall Apache man and a gray-haired white woman working in companionable silence, tending a soup pot between worlds. Some reacted with alarm or suspicion. A pair of Mormon settlers nearly fled at the sight of Náshŭ, until Martha's calm demeanor and his deliberate step backward reassured them. "He's a friend," Martha explained simply, serving them soup in the beautiful clay bowls. "And this is neutral ground." The travelers ate cautiously at first, then with appreciation. Before departing, the Mormon wife approached Martha privately. "How do you not fear him?" she asked, glancing toward Náshŭ, who was deliberately occupying himself with Buckley at a distance. "I've found," Martha replied carefully, "that fear is often wasted on the wrong people. He's shown me nothing but respect." Later, Náshŭ confessed that similar conversations occurred in his village. "My young warriors ask how I can trust a white woman," he said with a rare smile. "I tell them you have proven yourself through actions, not words." On days when no travelers came, they spoke of deeper things: his father's failing eyesight, her memories of Boston before the journey west, the challenges facing both their peoples as the country changed around them. "Your settlers push ever westward," he observed one afternoon as they sat in the shade of her porch. "Soon there will be no place my people can call our own." Martha nodded soberly. "I fear you're right. Thomas used to say America has a hunger no amount of land can satisfy. Yet you came west yourself." "We did," she acknowledged. Thomas dreamed of open spaces, of building something that was truly his. "I followed out of love, though I missed the comforts of town life." She paused, considering. Perhaps that's why he insisted on feeding travelers, to make amends in some small way for being part of the tide. Náshŭ considered this. There is wisdom in recognizing one's part in a larger movement and seeking balance. As the drought continued to worsen, their conversations often turned to water, its sacred nature, its conservation, the signs that might predict rain. Martha shared the subtler methods of dowsing and weather prediction. Náshŭ explained the Apache understanding of water spirits and rain ceremonies. Water connects all things, he told her, demonstrating how to create a small basin around plants to capture any moisture. What falls here flows there. What we protect nurtures us in return. Martha found herself incorporating his water-saving techniques into her daily routine, while he adopted her method of filtering impurities through layers of cloth and sand. 1. Evening, as the setting sun turned the dusty crossroads golden, Náshŭ paused before departing for his village. "Tomorrow," he said, "I will bring someone to meet you." Martha raised her eyebrows in question. "My father wishes to know the soup woman whose fire has welcomed his son." The significance of this statement wasn't lost on Martha. For the chief to show interest in meeting her represented a remarkable shift, one that filled her with both hope and trepidation. "I'll make the soup as best I can with what we have," she promised. Náshŭ nodded, his expression solemn, yet warm. "He does not come for soup, Martha Holloway. He comes to see what I have seen, a bridge between our worlds." The anticipated meeting with Chief Dying never took place. Shortly before dawn, Martha was awakened by Buckley's urgent barking and the sound of approaching horse, as not from the east where Náshŭ would come, but from the north road, the direction of Fort Laramie. She dressed hurriedly and stepped onto her porch just as 4 riders came into view. Even in the dim pre-dawn light, she recognized the lead rider's military bearing and the distinctive hat of a government surveyor among the group. Captain Fletcher dismounted first, removing his hat with practiced courtesy that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Holloway," he greeted her. "Apologies for the early hour." "Captain," she acknowledged, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "What brings the army to my door before sunrise?" Fletcher gestured to a thin man with spectacles who remained mounted. "This is Mr. Ambrose, from the Territorial Land Office. He has some information that concerns your situation here." The surveyor nodded stiffly, but made no move to dismount. The remaining 2 men were soldiers, their hands resting too casually near their holstered pistols for Martha's comfort. "Perhaps you gentlemen would like some coffee?" she offered, though her supply was nearly depleted. Old habits of hospitality died hard. "This isn't a social call, Mrs. Holloway," Fletcher said, his tone softening slightly. "Mr. Ambrose has been surveying this region for the new territorial maps and has made some discoveries about your property status." Ambrose cleared his throat and extracted a rolled document from his saddlebag. "According to the latest territorial directives," he began without preamble, "this crossroads has been designated as the site for an official trading post and potential stagecoach stop." He unfurled the document, a land deed with official seals and signatures at the bottom. Martha felt her heart sink, but kept her expression neutral. "I see. And what does that mean for my cabin?" "The government recognizes your improvement of the land," Ambrose continued in his reedy voice. "However, as a widow without male heirs and with no formal claim filed, your occupancy is considered temporary under territorial law." "Temporary?" Martha repeated, a cold feeling spreading through her chest. "I've been here 5 years. My husband is buried on that hill." Fletcher shifted uncomfortably. "The government is prepared to compensate you for improvements to the property, Mrs. Holloway, a fair sum to help you relocate to a proper settlement." "And if I don't wish to relocate?" she asked quietly. The captain and the surveyor exchanged glances. "Development of this crossroads will proceed regardless, ma'am," Fletcher said with finality. "The Army engineers will arrive within the month to begin construction of a proper trading post. There will be multiple buildings, military presence. This won't be the quiet place you've known." "I see." Martha's mind raced. This wasn't just about her cabin. A trading post would mean constant traffic, soldiers, likely conflicts with the Apache. Everything would change. "There's also the matter of your Visitors, Fletcher added, his tone hardening. We've had reports of Indians frequenting your property. Martha stiffened. I serve soup to whoever comes to my door, Captain. I don't ask for papers or pedigrees. That policy will have to change, Ambrose interjected. Official trading posts operate under strict regulations regarding Indian contact. Unauthorized fraternization undermines the territorial government's agreements with the tribes. Undermines or reveals their flaws? Martha couldn't help asking. Fletcher's expression darkened. Mrs. Holloway, I've always respected your courage in maintaining this outpost alone, but I must advise you the political situation is changing. The drought has everyone on edge. Tensions between settlers and Indians are rising. This is no time for a woman alone to be entertaining Apache visitors. Martha wondered suddenly if her friendship with Náshŭ Joe had been observed and reported. The thought that they might have been watched during their conversations made her uneasy. When must I decide? She asked. Ambrose consulted another document. You have 2 weeks to accept the compensation offer and vacate the premises. After that, construction begins regardless. 2 weeks, she echoed. Barely time to process, let alone plan. Fletcher stepped closer, lowering his voice. Martha, he said, using her given name for the first time in their acquaintance, this isn't just official business. I'm concerned for your safety. There's been increased Apache activity in the region. Scouts report ceremonial gatherings, possibly war preparations. Your position here is precarious. Martha met his gaze steadily. Thank you for your concern, Captain, but I've managed thus far. The situation is changing, he insisted. The drought pushes everyone to desperation. Your friendship with certain individuals won't protect you if larger conflicts erupt. She wondered how much he knew, how closely she'd been watched. I'll consider the government's offer, she said non-committally. Fletcher nodded, seemingly satisfied with this. Concession. We'll return in 1 week for your answer. He gestured to Ambrose, who extended the land deed toward Martha. She accepted the document, feeling its weight in her hand's official paper, declaring that her home, Thomas's dream, was no longer hers to claim. As the men prepared to depart, Fletcher paused. One more thing, Mrs. Holloway. I'd advise against discussing this matter with your Apache acquaintance. These territorial decisions aren't open to negotiation, especially not with the tribes. After they rode away, Martha sat heavily on her porch bench, the deed clutched in her hands. The crossroads stretched before her, dusty and quiet in the early morning light. Somewhere to the east, Náshŭ and his father were likely preparing to visit her. What would she tell them? How could she explain that the tentative bridge they had begun to build between their worlds might soon be demolished by progress? Buckley whined and pressed against her leg, sensing her distress. Martha absently stroked his graying head while staring at the eastern trail. She had 2 weeks to decide abandon Thomas's dream and the unexpected friendship she had found, or stand against the inexorable tide of westward expansion. From the ridge above the crossroads, unseen by Martha, Kitson had observed the entire exchange. The Apache warrior slipped away silently, racing back to report what he had witnessed in Náshŭ's chief dine. The council firestones glowed orange in the gathering dusk, their circular arrangement creating a sacred space where tribal decisions had been made for generations. Tonight, the stones witnessed heated debate as Chief Dine called the tribal council to address Kitson's troubling report. Náshŭ sat at his father's right hand, his face impassive despite the storm of emotions within. Elders and warriors formed the inner circle, while other tribal members gathered beyond, silent but attentive. The news of a trading post at the crossroads had spread quickly through the camp, stirring fear and anger in equal measure. The white government moves without consulting us, Taza declared, his ancient voice cracking with indignation. They claim land that has been Apache hunting ground since before their grandfathers were born. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. Chief Dine raised a weathered hand for silence. The crossing of trails has always been shared territory, the old chief reminded them. No tribe claims it exclusively. It is a place of passage, not permanence. Until the widow came, one warrior called out. Now they use her presence to justify taking more. All eyes turned to Náshŭ, whose friendship with Martha had become common knowledge. He met their gazes without flinching. The widow did not invite this change, he said clearly. She too is being driven from her home. She is white, Kitsan countered. They will compensate her, give her a new place among her kind. What will they give us for our hunting grounds, our water rights? Chief Dine tapped his walking stick against the earth, drawing attention back to himself. We must decide how to respond. The drought weakens us daily. Game grows scarce. Our young ones grow hungry. He looked around the circle. Some would say this is the time to fight, to drive away all whites from our territory. Several warriors straightened, hands moving unconsciously to their weapons. The sentiment clearly resonated with many. We tried fighting 20 summers ago, an elder woman named Ishtin reminded them. She rarely spoke at council, but when she did, all listened. My husband and 2 sons died in those battles. The bluecoats always return with more guns, more men. So, we should do nothing? A young warrior demanded. Watch as they build their trading post, and their fort, and their town? Náshŭ studied the council fire, gathering his thoughts before speaking. When he finally rose to his feet, the assembly grew completely silent. I have spent many days with the widow Martha, he began. I have tasted her food shared, her water, learned her story. She is not our enemy, but she is one of them, Kitsan insisted. She is herself, Náshŭ countered, as each of us is an individual before we are Apache. She respects our ways, shares what little she has. Even in drought, treats all people with dignity. And now she will be forced to leave, Chief Dine said. What becomes of the crossroads then? Náshŭ nodded slowly. A trading post means soldiers. Soldiers mean conflict. This is true. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. But it also means negotiation is still possible. The buildings have not yet been raised. The soldiers are not yet stationed. What are you suggesting, my son? The chief asked, though his clouded eyes suggested he already anticipated Náshŭ's thinking. I suggest that Martha Holloway might be an ally rather than an obstacle. She has lived at the crossroads for 5 years without bringing harm to our people. She has earned the respect of travelers from many nations. Her voice might carry weight with the white authorities. Skeptical murmurs met this proposal. The idea of trusting any white person, even the soup woman, with tribal concerns seemed far-fetched many. And if she cannot or will not help us? Taza questioned. What then? Then we are no worse than we are now, Náshŭ replied. Simply, but I believe she would try. Her heart is clear. Chief Dine considered his son's words, fingers tracing the patterns carved into his walking stick symbols of the tribe's history, its victories and losses, its adaptations to changing times. There is wisdom in exploring all paths before choosing war, he said finally. Náshŭ has the gift of seeing truth in hearts. If he believes this woman might help, we should consider the possibility. And if she betrays that trust? Kitsan pressed. The chief's expression hardened. Then we will respond as we must. An uncomfortable silence fell over the gathering. For many, the mere consideration of working with a white settler represented a troubling departure from tradition. Yet the drought had already forced many compromises, and all knew that direct conflict with the army would bring devastating consequences. I propose this, Náshŭ said, breaking the silence. Allow me to speak with Martha Holloway. Let me explain what this trading post would mean for our people, for the land itself. She has shown concern for the balance of water, for the health of the earth. These things matter to her. And if she agrees to help, Ishtan asked, what would you have her do? Speak to her own kind about alternatives. Náshŭ replied. Perhaps the trading post could be built elsewhere, away from our hunting grounds and water sources. Perhaps agreements could be made to protect the sacred springs. Taza snorted skeptically. White promises are written on water. Not all whites are the same, Náshŭ insisted. Just as not all Apache think alike. He gestured to the divided council as evidence. Chief Dine raised his hand once more, signaling his decision. My son will speak with the widow. He will determine if she can be trusted with our concerns. His voice grew stern as he addressed the rest of the council. But we will also prepare for less peaceful outcomes. The young men will monitor the soldiers' movements. The women will store what food and water we can spare. If we must leave these lands, we will do so prepared. He turned to Náshŭ. You have until the new moon to discover if your soup woman is truly the ally you believe her to be. After that, we must make harder choices. Náshŭ nodded solemnly, accepting both the opportunity and its limitations. As the council dispersed, he remained by the firestones, watching the flames dance among them. Tomorrow, he would return to the crossroads, but with a far heavier purpose than sharing soup and stories. Tomorrow, he would learn whether the fragile bridge between their worlds could bear the weight of true alliance, or whether it would collapse under pressure, as so many before it had. Martha slept fitfully the night after the government official's visit, her dreams troubled by images of water, a great rushing river, a deluge that threatened to wash away her cabin, yet somehow promised renewal rather than destruction. She woke repeatedly, disoriented and parched. The drought's reality, a stark contrast to the dream's abundance by dawn. She had abandoned any hope of further rest. She sat at her small table, the government's land deed spread before her, its official. Script and seals representing an ultimatum she had no desire to accept. 2 weeks to leave to abandon Thomas's final resting place, the home they had built together, and now, strangely, her unexpected friendship with Náshŭ. The sound of approaching footsteps drew her to the door. Náshŭ stood in the early morning light, his expression more solemn than usual. Without greeting, he said, You had visitors yesterday. Martha nodded, unsurprised that he knew. Government men. They want to build a trading post here. They've given me 2 weeks to leave. Something flickered in his eyes, confirmation rather than surprise. Kitson saw, he admitted. He brought word to our council. I suppose I should have expected it, Martha sighed, gesturing for him to enter. The crossroads was bound to be noticed eventually. Inside, she poured them each a small cup of precious water. They sat across from each other at her table, the deed between them like a boundary line. Our council debated long into the night, Náshŭ told her. Many believe we should fight, drive away all whites from our territory. Martha met his gaze steadily. And what do you believe? I believe fighting brings only more death, more hatred. But a trading post means soldiers, and soldiers mean conflict will find us regardless. Martha nodded, feeling the weight of inevitability pressing down. They told me not to discuss this with you, she admitted. Captain Fletcher seemed to know about our friendship. The bluecoats watch more than they admit, Náshŭ replied, just as we watched them. A heavy silence fell between them, filled with unspoken implications. Finally, Martha asked, What will your people do? That depends, he said carefully. On what you will do. Martha blinked in surprise. Me? I have no power in this. They've made it clear my presence here was only tolerated, never officially recognized. Yet you have lived at this crossroads for 5 years. respected by travelers of many nations. Your voice might carry weight that ours cannot. You want me to speak against the trading post? Martha asked, understanding dawning. I want you to speak for balance, Náshŭ clarified. A trading post built without thought for the water, for the hunting grounds, for the peace between peoples. This brings harm to all, even the whites who build it. Martha considered his words, turning the small cup in her hands. I had a strange dream last night, she said suddenly. About water, a great flood coming from the mountains, powerful enough to change the land. Náshŭ went very still. What else did you see in this dream? A circle of stones with fire in the center. People gathering around it, your people, I think. And she hesitated. ... the two of us, standing between the fire and the water, somehow bringing them together without destruction. The cup in. Náshŭ trembled slightly, the first sign of strong emotion she had ever seen him display. I dreamed this same vision, he said quietly. Last night, after the council fire had burned to embers. Martha felt a chill despite the morning warmth. How is that possible? Dreams are the shadows of spirits moving across our minds, he replied. When two people dream the same dream, the spirits are trying to show a path forward. What does it mean, then? Martha asked, feeling strangely unmoored from her practical New England upbringing. Náshŭ placed his cup on the table and reached into a small pouch at his belt. From it, he withdrew an intricately crafted dream catcher. Small wooden hoop with a delicate web of sinew strands inside, decorated with feathers and tiny beads of turquoise and bone. Among my people, such shared visions are sacred, he explained, offering her the dream catcher. They suggest that our spirits recognized each other before our waking minds did. Martha accepted the gift hesitantly, its craftsmanship and significance. Humbling her, I don't understand what you're saying. I believe we were meant to find each other, Náshŭ said simply. Not by chance, but by the design of forces greater than ourselves. You with your soup that nourishes bodies, me, with my gift for seeing truth in hearts, both of us caught between worlds, both of us seeking balance. Martha traced the dream catcher's intricate pattern with her fingertip. Even if that's true, what difference can we make against government orders, against drought, against history itself? Perhaps none, he acknowledged. Or perhaps the difference. That changes everything. Their eyes met across the table, and Martha felt something shift between them, a barrier dissolving, a connection deepening. For 5 years since Thomas's death, she had held herself apart from genuine human closeness, finding purpose in service, but allowing no one past her carefully maintained boundaries. Now, faced with this man from an entirely different world, she felt those boundaries wavering. Náshŭ seemed to sense the change. With deliberate gentleness, he reached across the table and touched her hand, the first time he had initiated such contact. His fingers were warm against hers, calloused from a lifetime of hunting and riding. The dream showed us standing together. He reminded her, neither of us alone. Martha didn't pull away. What would you have us do? First, speak to your Captain Fletcher when he returns. Tell him the trading post threatens the delicate peace we have maintained. Suggest another location, away from the sacred springs and hunting grounds. He won't listen to me, Martha said doubtfully. He might, if we show him another way. Náshŭ's eyes held a new light. The drought affects everyone white, Apache, Mexican. What if we could demonstrate that cooperation brings more benefit than conflict? How? A ceremony, he said. Conviction growing in his voice. Not just Apache, not just white, but a combined asking for rain. My father has spoken of such things in the ancient days, when different tribes would set aside their differences to address greater threats. Martha considered the seemingly impossible idea settlers and Apache praying together for rain. Yet, something about it resonated with her dream, with the inexplicable connection that had formed between them. "They'll call me crazy," she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Possibly a witch. My people might say the same of me," Náshŭ admitted, his own smile answering hers. "Yet the dream chose us both." Word spread quickly along the trail networks among both settlers and Apache that something unprecedented would take place at the widow's crossroads. Martha had spent 3 days visiting nearby homesteads and passing travelers, while Náshŭ had returned to his village to convince skeptical tribal members. Against all odds, both had found guarded interest rather than outright rejection. The drought had reached a critical point. Even the most stubborn settlers were desperate enough to consider unconventional solutions, while the Apache elders, led by Chief Dine, recognized the value in demonstrating peaceful cooperation before the army established a permanent presence. On the morning of the ceremony, Martha rose before dawn to find Náshŭ already at work in her yard. Together they had designed a new hearth, a blend of her traditional cooking fire and the Apache ceremonial circle. They had dug a shallow pit, lined it with stones gathered from both Apache sacred sites and the hill where Thomas was buried, creating a physical manifestation of their merged traditions. "Will it be enough?" Martha asked softly, watching him arrange kindling in the pattern his people had used for generations. "It is not the fire that brings rain," he replied, "but the intentions we place within it." He paused, looking up at her. "Are you certain about this? Your people may not understand." Martha thought of Captain Fletcher's likely reaction, of the whispers that would follow her if she left the crossroads for another settlement. "Thomas would have approved," she said simply. "That's enough for me." By mid-morning, the first participants began to arrive. 3 settler families from within a day's ride approached cautiously from the west, bringing what food they could spare for the communal meal that would follow the ceremony. From the east came a small group of Apache, led by Chief Dine himself, his clouded eyes scanning the gathering with uncanny awareness despite his limited vision. The 2 groups kept their distance initially, settling on opposite sides of the clearing with a new hearth between them. Martha moved between them, offering water and reassurance, while Náshŭ spoke quietly with his father and the tribal elders as noon approached. More people arrived, Mexican traders who had dealt with both communities, a pair of Mormon missionaries, even Ellis, the old trapper, who had known the land before either group claimed it. Each brought something for the ceremony: herbs, cornmeal, cloth offerings, or simply their presence and hope. The combined hearth remained unlit as Náshŭ and Martha met in the center of the gathering. They had rehearsed this moment carefully, knowing that the ceremony's beginning would set the tone for everything that followed. "We gather today from different paths," Martha began, her voice clear in the still air, "but with a shared need. The drought affects all of us, our crops, our animals, our children's futures. The water spirits hear many languages," Náshŭ continued, "but understand the language of respect above all others. Today we speak together, honoring both the Christian God and the Apache spirits." A murmur ran through both groups, some approving, others uncertain. Martha noticed one settler whispering harshly to his wife, who silenced him with a sharp look. Among the Apache, she saw similar divisions, though Chief Dine's presence lent legitimacy to the proceedings. Together, Martha and Náshŭ bent to light the new hearth. She used Thomas's flint striker, which she had saved from their original homestead. Náshŭ added kindling gathered from lightning-struck trees, considered sacred by his people. The fire caught quickly, as if eager for its role. What followed was a carefully choreographed blend of traditions. The Apache performed their rain songs, their haunting melodies rising into the cloudless sky. Then Martha led the settlers in hymns she remembered from church, their different voices gradually finding harmony. Chief Dine offered tobacco the four directions while the settler minister read passages about rain from his Bible. In all, Martha and Náshŭ remained at the center, their physical proximity a living symbol of the bridge they sought to build. At one point, when tension seemed to rise between a young Apache warrior and a suspicious settler, Náshŭ quietly took Martha's hand in his own, a gesture not lost on either group. The most powerful moment came when they shared food. Martha had prepared her soup in the great iron pot, while the Apache women had brought traditional corn cakes and wild greens. Initially, each group ate only what was familiar, but Martha deliberately served Apache food to the settlers while Náshŭ offered soup to his people. Gradually, tentative exchanges began. A settler child accepting a corn cake with curiosity, an Apache elder nodding appreciatively at the flavor of the soup dot as afternoon stretched toward evening. Something shifted in the atmosphere. The rigid separation between the groups began to dissolve. Conversations emerged, halting at first, then more natural. A settler farmer and an Apache hunter discovered they tracked game using similar signs. Two mothers compared remedies for children's coughs. Ellis the trapper acted as intermediary, translating stories about the land before the drought. Throughout it all, the combined hearth burned steadily, tended by both Apache and settler hands. Martha found herself watching the interactions with a mixture of hope and disbelief. For a few hours at least, the division seemed less insurmountable. Chief Dine approached her as the ceremony was winding down, Náshŭ at his side. The old man's weathered face was solemn, but not unkind. "You have a strong spirit, Soup Woman," he said through his son's translation. "My son sees truly when he says your heart is clear." "Thank you," Martha replied, genuinely moved by the compliment. "Your people's traditions are beautiful. I'm honored to learn from them." The chief nodded slowly. "The fire we built today speaks with one voice now, not two separate tongues. This is good. But will your leaders listen to its message?" It was the question that had haunted Martha throughout the day's events. Captain Fletcher was due to return in 3 days for her decision about the trading post. "I don't know," she admitted honestly, "but they cannot unhear what has been spoken here, nor unsee what has been witnessed." As if in response to her words, a distant rumble of thunder sounded from beyond the western mountains. Every head turned, conversations halting mid-sentence. After weeks of relentless blue skies, a line of dark clouds had appeared on the horizon. Náshŭ eyes met Martha's across the combined hearth, surprise and something deeper reflected in his gaze. Neither spoke the hope that suddenly filled the air, that perhaps their unlikely ceremony had been heard after all. By nightfall, the distant rumble of thunder had grown to a continuous roar. The storm approached with unexpected speed, winds driving dust before the rain in swirling clouds. Most participants had departed after the ceremony, heading for their homes before darkness fell, but a few remained, the Apache elders too elderly to travel quickly. 2 settler families whose wagons had developed wheel problems, and the Mexican traders who had decided to wait out the coming storm. "It's coming too fast," Martha said worriedly, watching lightning split the sky in jagged streaks of blue-white light. "This isn't a gentle rain." Náshŭ nodded, his expression grave. "The spirits sometimes answer with more force than we request." He turned to the remaining Apache. "You must move to higher ground. The dry creek beds will fill quickly." Chief Dine spoke rapidly in Apache, directing his people to gather their belongings. Martha approached the settler families, who were attempting to repair their wagon in the growing wind. "You're welcome to shelter in my cabin," she offered. "I don't think you'll make it home before this hits." The father of one family, James Wilson, a homesteader from 10 miles west, looked skeptically at the sky. "We've seen summer storms before, Mrs. Holloway. Looks fearsome, but passes quick." "Not like this," she insisted. Not after so long. Drought. The ground can't absorb sudden water. It'll run off like a flash flood. As if to emphasize her point, the first fat raindrops began to fall, striking the dust with audible impacts. Within moments, the scattered drops became a curtain of water, visibility dropping to mere yards. Inside now! Martha shouted over the sudden downpour, herding the settlers toward her cabin. She turned to ensure the Apache group was moving toward. The ridge is planned, but the rain was too heavy to see clearly. Náshŭ appeared at her side, already soaked to the skin. "My father and the elders are safe on the rise," he shouted over the storm's roar. "But there are children from our camp who are collecting firewood in the eastern gully." Martha's heart clenched. The eastern gully was a dry wash that ran 4 miles, channeling snowmelt in spring, but bone dry for years now. In a sudden downpour like this, it would become a raging torrent within minutes. "How many?" she asked, already moving toward her cabin door. 3. 2 boys and a girl, ages 8 to 12. Inside the cabin, the settlers were huddled by the hearth, their children wide-eyed with fear as thunder crashed overhead. Martha moved quickly to a trunk in the corner and extracted a coil of rope salvaged from their wagon crossing days. "There are Apache children in danger," she announced. "Mr. Wilson, I need your help." The settler looked startled, glancing at his wife. "Apache children? Children?" Martha repeated firmly. "Just like yours? Caught in a storm." Something in her tone brooked no argument. Wilson nodded, taking the rope from her. Martha grabbed Thomas's old oilskin coat and turned to Náshŭ, who stood dripping in the doorway. "Show us where," she said simply. Together, the unlikely trio plunged back into the deluge. The rain was coming so hard now that it stung their skin, driven sideways by gusting winds. They struggled eastward, fighting against the gale as lightning provided brief, blinding glimpses of the landscape. What they saw during those flashes was terrifying. The dry gully, which had been nothing but cracked earth that morning, was now a churning river, brown water rushing in a torrent that tore at the banks and uprooted the sparse vegetation. "There!" Náshŭ shouted, pointing to a partially collapsed overhang where 3 small figures huddled, trapped by the rising water. The children had sought shelter under the outcropping, but the flash flood had cut off their escape route. The water was rising rapidly, already lapping at the narrow ledge where they clung. Without hesitation, Martha waded into the edge of the floodwater, testing its pull. The current nearly swept her feet from under her at just ankle depth. "We can't cross directly," she shouted to the men. "We need to make a human chain with the rope." Wilson, whatever his earlier hesitation, was now fully committed to the rescue. He secured one end of the rope around his waist and the other to a sturdy juniper that somehow still clung to the bank. "I'm the strongest swimmer," he declared, though. In truth, none of them could truly swim against such a current. "I'll go," Náshŭ countered. "They are my people's children. They'll trust me." Martha ended the debate by taking the middle position. "I'm lightest." "You anchor," she told Wilson. "And you," she said to Náshŭ, "pull us back once I have them." Before either man could protest, she had looped the rope around her waist and was edging into the flood, using the line as a brace against the current. The water was shockingly cold, the rope cutting into her ribs as it took her weight. Step by careful step, she moved diagonally across the flow, aiming for the ledge where the children waited. The smallest child began to cry when she was halfway across, a sound barely audible above the storm, but that tore at Martha's heart. "Almost there," she called encouragingly. "Just hold on a little longer." A sudden surge lifted her off her feet, the rope jerking painfully as it caught her. For a terrifying moment, she was suspended in the torrent, water rushing over her head. Then powerful hands were pulling the rope, dragging her to the surface and toward the bank. Náshŭ had waded in despite the danger, using his strength to haul her back to safety. Gasping and sputtering, Martha found herself on solid ground again. Together, Náshŭ said firmly, or not at all. Wilson had lashed the rope to the tree and joined them, creating a human chain. With the three adults working in concert, they forged a path through the floodwater, bracing each other against the current. When they reached the ledge, the children's eyes were wide, with terror but also hope. "One at a time," Martha instructed, helping the smallest child, a girl no more than 8, onto her back. "Hold tight to my shoulders." The return journey was even more perilous, the water still rising with each passing minute. When they finally delivered all 3 children to safety, Martha found herself trembling with exhaustion and cold. There was no time to rest. Already the floodwaters were spreading beyond the gully's banks, threatening to reach her cabin. "We need to warn the others," she gasped, looking toward the crossroads where the Mexican traders had camped. But even as she spoke, a wall of water came rushing down from the north, a flash flood from the mountains that had caught the full force of the storm. It swept across the crossroads in a churning mass, carrying debris and uprooting the ancient marker post that had stood for generations. "Martha!" Náshŭ shouted, lunging toward her as the flood surge reached them. His powerful arms encircled her waist, pulling her back as the ground crumbled beneath her feet. Dawn revealed a transformed landscape. The storm had passed in the night, leaving behind a world simultaneously destroyed and renewed. Martha's cabin had survived. The water had seeped under the door and soaked the wooden floor. The crossroads itself was unrecognizable, gouged by flash floods, littered with debris carried from miles away, yet also vibrantly alive in a way it hadn't been for months. Already, green shoots were pushing through the mud where yesterday there had been only dust and cracked earth. Martha stood on her porch, surveying the damage and rebirth with Náshŭ beside her. They had worked through the night, first rescuing the Mexican traders who had been stranded on a small rise of land, then helping the Apache elders secure temporary shelter after their camp had been partially flooded. Neither had slept, yet both felt a strange energy that transcended physical exhaustion. "Your soup pot was found half a mile downstream," Náshŭ said, nodding toward where 2 Apache women were scrubbing mud from the great iron vessel, undamaged. Martha smiled, tiredly. Thomas always said it was too stubborn to break. Her smile faded as she observed the full scope of the recovery work ahead. But so much is lost. Indeed, the combined hearth they had built had been washed away entirely. Several Apache shelters had collapsed under the deluge. The Wilson family's wagon was damaged beyond immediate repair, its contents strewn across the newly formed marshland that had once been the Eastern Trail. Yet something remarkable was happening among the wreckage. Apache and settlers worked side by side without the previous day's hesitation or suspicion. The boundaries that had seemed so rigid during the ceremony had dissolved in the shared emergency of the flood. Children from both communities splashed through puddles together while their parents exchanged tools and knowledge about flood recovery. "Look there," Náshŭ said softly, directing Martha's attention to a group of Apache women who had set up a weaving station in a patch of sunlight. They were creating a large tapestry, their fingers flying across makeshift looms salvaged from the flood. The emerging pattern depicted the previous night's rescue, showing Martha, Náshŭ, and Wilson forming their human chain to save the children. "They're recording what happened," he explained. "In our tradition, important events are preserved in weaving, so future generations will remember." Martha watched, deeply moved by the honor. "They include Mr. Wilson as well," she noted. "A man is judged by his actions, not his ancestry," Náshŭ replied. "He proved himself a warrior when it mattered." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Captain Fletcher and his men appeared on the northern trail, their expressions shifting from professional detachment to shock as they took in the scene before them. Apache and settlers working together amidst the flood's aftermath. Fletcher dismounted. Slowly, his eyes moving from the cooperative recovery efforts to Martha herself. "Mrs. Holloway," he greeted her with careful neutrality, "we came to check on you after the storm." His gaze flickered to Náshŭ. "I see you have assistance." "We all do," Martha replied simply, gesturing to the communal work happening around them. The flood didn't discriminate between Apache land and settler property. Fletcher signaled his men to stand down as he approached the porch. "I admit, this is not what I expected to find." He lowered his voice. "Mrs. Holloway, you do understand that fraternization with the tribes is discouraged. There are treaties, boundaries, which matter little to drowning children," Martha interrupted firmly. She briefly recounted the previous night's rescue efforts, emphasizing the cooperation that had saved lives on both sides. Fletcher's expression remained skeptical, but something in his eyes had changed as he surveyed the scene again, particularly the Apache women creating their commemorative tapestry. "The territorial government won't change its plans for the trading post based on one night of emergency cooperation," he warned, though his tone lacked conviction. "Perhaps not," Martha agreed, "but they might reconsider its location and design if shown how a different approach could benefit everyone." She gestured toward the spring, where to everyone's amazement, water now flowed more abundantly than it had in years. The flood had cleared blockages and opened new channels from the mountain aquifer. "The drought may have broken, Captain, but water will always be precious here. Any trading post built without considering its impact on the watershed will ultimately fail. The Apache understand this land better than any government surveyor." Fletcher frowned, but before he could respond, Wilson approached, still muddy from helping clear debris from the creek bed. "Captain," he said with a respectful nod, "my family would be dead if not for Mrs. Holloway and these Apache folks. 3 of their children would be gone too, if we hadn't worked together." He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I've had my prejudices. I won't deny it. But I've seen something different here that's worth considering." Fletcher's gaze moved from Wilson to the working groups scattered across the crossroads, then back to Martha and Náshŭ. "I'll include this in my report," he said finally. "I make no promises about the outcome. That's all we ask," Martha replied. "That what happened here be fairly represented." After Fletcher and his men departed, having helped with some of the heavier clearing work in a gesture of goodwill, Náshŭ turned to Martha with an expression she'd never seen on his face before, something like wonder. "You stood as an equal to him," he observed, and he listened. "He may not act on what he heard," Martha cautioned, "but the seed is planted." Náshŭ, as hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally, as if they'd been doing it for years rather than days. "Like these new shoots after the rain." Martha looked down at their joined hands and up at his face. Something had shifted between them during the crisis, the formal boundaries of their friendship giving way to something deeper and more complex. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now," he replied, "we rebuild. Not as separate peoples sharing space, but as a community that has weathered the flood together." From the hill where Thomas was buried, the crossroads below seemed to glow in the morning light, no longer a simple intersection of trails, but the beginning of something new, an unexpected dot in the weeks following the flood. Life at the crossroads settled into a new rhythm. The spring flowed abundantly, attracting more travelers than ever before. Martha's soup ritual expanded, with Apache women occasionally contributing their own dishes to create a more varied offering. The territorial government had postponed its decision about the trading post, sending surveyors to assess alternative locations that might satisfy both settler needs and Apache concerns. Throughout this time of transition, Náshŭ had been a constant presence at Martha's cabin. Their partnership in managing the crossroads had become something the travelers remarked upon, the widow and the Apache prince working in seamless coordination, as if they'd been doing so for years rather than months. What Martha didn't immediately recognize were the subtle changes in Náshŭ's behavior, the small gifts left at her door each morning before she woke, the special attention he paid to maintaining her cabin, the way he began to involve her in Apache ceremonies that were typically closed to outsiders. In her practical New England way, she attributed these gestures to the deepening friendship between them. It was Ellis, the old trapper, who finally enlightened her. "He's courting you, Martha," the weathered mountain man said bluntly one afternoon, as they watched Náshŭ instructing some Apache youth by the spring. "Has been for weeks now, plain as day to anyone with eyes." Martha nearly dropped the pot she was washing. "Don't be ridiculous. He's half my age," Alice snorted. "Closer to 10 years younger, I'd wager. And among his people, a woman of your experience is highly valued. Besides," he added with surprising gentleness, "age matters less than what two souls recognize in each other." That night, unable to sleep, Martha found herself at Thomas's grave on the hill overlooking the crossroads. The moonlight silvered the simple wooden cross, making the carved epitaph stand out in sharp relief. "He fed the hungry." "What would you think, Thomas?" she whispered to the quiet night. "I never imagined, never thought I'd feel this way again." Only the cricket song answered her, yet somehow the silence felt companionable rather than empty. Martha sat beside the grave until dawn, sorting through the complicated tangle of emotions that Ellis's observation had unleashed. When Náshŭ arrived that morning, she looked at him with new awareness. He must have sensed the change, for he paused in his greeting, studying her face intently. "You have been to the hill," he said simply, noting the grass stains on her skirt. Martha nodded. "Ellis says you've been courting me." If she expected embarrassment or denial, she was disappointed. Náshŭ met her gaze steadily. "I have. In the ways of my people. Why didn't you say something directly?" "Among Apache, intentions are shown through actions before words," he explained. "To speak too soon would dishonor the depth of feeling." Martha's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her shawl. "I'm a widow of 5 years, Náshŭ. I'm not young. My childbearing years are behind me. I have 2 sons from my first wife, who died in childbirth," he replied. "They are being raised by my sister until they are of age to join the warriors. I do not seek a mother for them, but a partner for myself." This revelation surprised her. He had never mentioned children before. "Still," she said uncertainly, "there are differences between us that can't be ignored." Our worlds have already joined," he interrupted gently. "Here, at this crossroads. What we began out of necessity has grown into something neither of us expected, but both recognize as valuable." Martha couldn't argue with this truth. The cooperation between Apache and settlers had continued beyond the flood's immediate aftermath. Trading had increased, knowledge was being shared about plants and water conservation, and genuine friendships had formed across cultural boundaries. "I have something to show you," Náshŭ said, reaching into the pouch at his belt. Withdrew a small object that caught the morning light, a ring, unlike any Martha had seen before. The band was silver, clearly fashioned from a coin or small piece of jewelry, but set with a stunning piece of blue-green turquoise, in a style that was distinctly Apache. "I made this," he said, holding it toward her. "The silver came from your husband's wedding band, which you keep in your cedar chest." Martha gasped. "You took Thomas's ring? Without asking?" "I asked him," Náshŭ replied with such simple conviction that Martha fell silent. "I sat at his grave through a night and a day, fasting and praying in the Apache way. I asked his blessing to transform his symbol of love into one that honors his memory while creating something new. Martha stared at the ring, emotions washing through her in waves. The thought of Thomas's ring being melted should have horrified her, yet the beauty of what Náshŭ had created, a perfect blending of their two worlds, moved her deeply. "A turquoise?" she asked softly. "From my grandfather's medicine pouch. It represents the sky and water, elements that connect all living things." He held the ring out to her. "I offer this as a bridge between your past and our future, if you choose to accept it." Martha looked from the ring to his face, seeing in his eyes the same steady strength and kindness that had first drawn her to him. She thought of Thomas, of the life they had built at the crossroads, of his dream to create a place that connected people. In an unexpected way, his vision had been fulfilled more completely than either of them could have imagined. Chief Dine had given his blessing to their union the previous day, seeing in it a symbol of peace and a new way forward for his people. The tribal elders, initially skeptical, had been won over by Martha's actions during and after the flood. They now referred to her as Soup Woman, who bridges worlds, a name of respect that acknowledged her unique position between cultures. "If I accept," Martha said carefully, "how would this work? Where would we live?" "Your people, my cabin. We live here, at the crossroads," Náshŭ answered simply. "We continue what we have begun. The territorial government will build their trading post eventually, but thanks to our efforts, it will be located with respect for the water and the hunting grounds. The crossroads remains what it has always been, a place of meeting, now with deeper purpose." Martha looked toward the hill where Thomas rested, then back to Náshŭ and the ring that represented both her past and a possible future she had never imagined. "I need time," she said finally. "Time is a gift I gladly give," he replied, closing his hand around the ring. The Apache believe that true unions are not rushed, but allowed to ripen like fruit in the sun. Autumn painted the landscape in golds and russets as Martha stood on the porch of her expanded cabin, watching the sunrise illuminate the crossroads. The season of transformation seemed fitting for the changes that had reshaped her life over the past months. The cabin itself embodied these changes, no longer a solitary settler's dwelling, but a blend of traditions. Apache-style ramadas extended from the original log structure, providing shaded outdoor living spaces. The roof had been reinforced with techniques Náshŭ's people had perfected over generations. Inside, Thomas's furniture shared space with beautifully woven Apache rugs and ceremonial items. 3 months had passed since Náshŭ's proposal. Martha had taken the time she needed, visiting Thomas's grave often, sorting through her feelings of loyalty to his memory and her growing love for the Apache prince who had transformed her understanding of purpose and connection. In the end, her answer had come not through agonized deliberation, but through a moment of clarity while ladling soup for a mixed group of travelers, Apache, Mexican, and settlers, all sharing stories around the communal fire they had built together at the crossroads. Looking up to find Náshŭ's eyes on her, she had known with sudden certainty that Thomas would have approved of this unexpected continuation of Vav. His dream. The wedding ceremony had taken place 2 weeks ago at the harvest moon. True, too. The bridge they were building between cultures, it had incorporated elements from both traditions. Martha had worn her best dress, carefully preserved from her Boston days, but with a crown of desert flowers woven by Apache women. Náshŭ had dressed in traditional buckskins adorned with symbols of his lineage, but had stood beside the settlement minister, who read passages about love and partnership. Chief Dine had blessed their union in the Apache language, his clouded eyes somehow finding Martha with unerring accuracy as he proclaimed her daughter of my heart, bridge between peoples. The old chief's support had silenced any remaining skeptics from either community. Most remarkable of all, had been the attendance of Captain Fletcher himself, representing the territorial government. The compromise he had helped broker had been officially approved. The trading post would be built a mile north of the crossroads, preserving both Martha's cabin and the Apache access to Sacred Springs. More significantly, the crossroads itself had been designated a neutral meeting ground, where both cultures could trade and gather without restriction. "You changed their minds," Martha had told Fletcher after the ceremony. The captain had shaken his head ruefully. "You and your husband changed mine first," he'd admitted. "Some of my superiors still think this arrangement is foolhardy, but others see the wisdom in finding a middle path. Time will tell which view prevails." Now, as dawn light spilled across the landscape, Martha sensed Náshŭ's presence before she heard his quiet footsteps behind her. His arms encircled her waist, a gesture that still held novelty and comfort in equal measure. "You rose early," he observed, his breath warm against her hair. "Old habits," she replied with a smile. "The soup won't make itself." Together they watched as the day's first travelers appeared on the western trail, a small wagon train heading toward California. Word had spread about the crossroads settlement, where Apache and whites coexisted peacefully, where travelers could find rest and nourishment, regardless of origin. Some came out of curiosity, others seeking the abundant water that had returned to the region, but all found something unexpected in the community that was taking shape around Martha's soup pot. Náshŭ's sons had joined them after the wedding, solemn 10-year-old twins who had initially regarded Martha with cautious curiosity. She had won them over gradually through stories of Thomas's adventures and patient instruction in English words, while they taught her Apache games and helped tend the expanded garden that now flourished near the spring. "I never imagined this life," Martha confessed as they began their morning routine, stoking the fire and preparing for the day's visitors. "When Thomas died, I thought my purpose was simply to continue his tradition of feeding travelers." Náshŭ nodded thoughtfully. "And I believed my path was solely to lead my people through difficult times, to preserve what we could of our ways." He handed her Thomas's wooden spoon, still her preferred implement for stirring the soup. "Neither of us foresaw that grief could lead to a new beginning. Thomas used to say that endings and beginnings are just different names for the same moment," Martha replied, accepting the spoon with a smile. "Like a crossroads." As the sun climbed higher, travelers began to gather in the clearing before the cabin. Apache families arrived from the east, bringing fresh game and stories. Settlers came from the west with vegetables and news from distant territories. Mexican traders appeared from the south with spices and cloth to barter. Martha and Náshŭ moved among them with practiced ease, greeting each arrival, facilitating exchanges, ensuring that everyone received their share of the day's soup. The great iron pot, which had survived flood and drought, bubbled contentedly over the fire of the combined hearth they had rebuilt together. As evening approached, and the day's activities wound down, they climbed the hill to visit Thomas's grave, ritual they performed together each week. Martha placed fresh wildflowers against the wooden cross, while Náshŭ offered a pinch of sacred tobacco to the winds. "He would be proud," Náshŭ said quietly, "of how you transformed his dream into something greater than either of you imagined." Martha gazed down at the crossroads below, where the remnants of the day's gathering still lingered in the golden light of sunset. Apache children played alongside settler youngsters, learning each other's games. Elders from both communities sat in the shade, exchanging remedies for common ailments and stories of their ancestors. "Not just me," she corrected gently, taking his hand in hers. "Us, all of us together." They descended the hill as twilight softened the landscape, returning to their expanded cabin that stood as a living symbol of two worlds coming together, not in conflict, but in the simple, profound act of sharing soup at a dusty crossroads, where a widow's generosity had caught the attention of an Apache, prince with the gift of seeing into generous hearts.